guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Gloria and thank you so much for clicking on today's video. Today I wanted to talk about the most common kind of houseplant problems that you guys may have. So just a bunch of different things going from like root rot all the way to like humidity or light issues. And yeah, I hope you find today's video helpful in one way or another. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already so you don't miss out on any of my new videos. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started with today's video. So first off on the list of the most common houseplant problems definitely includes root rot. So root rot is essentially a combination of overwatering along with root suffocation from lack of oxygen and airflow, which, you know, plants can bounce back from it. So it's not like end all be all type of situation, but you might lose a few leaves, you might have to regrow roots. It does kind of set back the plant a little bit, and you definitely don't want that. So starting off the new year, you don't want your plants to be suffering from root rot, and there's a lot of ways to kind of combat this issue. First off, by making sure there's drainage holes in your pot that you're using. Even better is to have kind of ventilation slits on the side of the pot, but I know those aren't as common. Usually they're found in like orchid nurseries for orchid pots, but if you want to use those for your houseplants, you definitely could. And it would definitely help with kind of airflow to the roots. Another thing is to make sure when you're watering, you only do so when the soil is kind of starting to get dry or is fully dry, depending on the type of plant. You don't want to kind of have the roots be in soggy soil all the time. So that's what we call like wet feet, which I kind of don't like that term. Sounds kind of disturbing, but yeah, you get my point. Essentially, you don't want the roots to be constantly wet, and that way it helps prevent root rot. So second on the list, I do want to talk about air and dry air, to be kind of exact. So with dry air, it essentially means the humidity is not high enough, and if you live in a place where humidity is very low, particularly in the winter, you definitely need these tips, because I currently live in Canada, and without a humidifier or any kind of supplemental ways of increasing the humidity, the air is at like 20 something percent, which is not good for tropical plants, because tropical plants love humidity. And ways to kind of increase that is obviously with humidifier. You can get those like anywhere. I buy mine from Amazon. It's probably not the best humidifier out there because it doesn't measure the relative air humidity. It just has like an on-off button, and you could turn it from like minimum all the way to maximum. But there are kind of more like high-tech humidifiers out there that you can kind of adjust your humidifier levels based on the relative humidity, and it will do like an automatic shut off, so that you're not wasting, you know, the water and the energy in your home. But you can also increase humidity by kind of grouping all of your plants together. So that really helps with increasing humidity for kind of smaller spaces or even big spaces. So if you group like, let's say 5 or so plants together, the humidity around those plants will be a lot higher than the rest of the room, because plants kind of give each other humidity, which is really good. What is a common misconception is misting your plants. So that essentially only increases the humidity for like few minutes until the water droplets evaporate off the leaves. So that's not really too helpful in terms of increasing the humidity and combating dry air. I would say using a pebble tray filled with water and then placing your plants on top of that would be a little bit more helpful, because at least there is a bigger water reservoir for the water to evaporate and go into the air and increase the humidity that way. So if you really can't find, afford, or want a humidifier in your home, then you could use like a pebble tray with some water in it. An obvious way to increase humidity is also by kind of having a greenhouse. So whether it's a very fancy IKEA Millsbo greenhouse, or just like a nice plastic green crappy greenhouse, those will both increase humidity for your plants if you place your plants inside that greenhouse. But if you're like me and like to kind of keep your plants out in the open and just really admire the plants, I personally just run a humidifier 24/7 for the humidity. But you know, some people just find it a bit of a hassle to be cleaning and also filling up their humidifier, so they'll get themselves a greenhouse. So that's also a really good tip for kind of fighting the dry air, especially in the winter season. Third on the list of common houseplant problems is not having enough light. So when you don't have enough light, plants can't photosynthesize and create bigger and beautiful new leaves. So how do you fix that issue of not enough light? You essentially have to get grow lights. So if you have like a north facing window and you live in the northern hemisphere, you essentially just won't be getting any direct sunlight, and your room or your house will be just kind of more on the darker side. So if you have low light loving plants, they'll do perfectly fine. But if you have like medium light plants or even highlight loving plants, you'll definitely need some grow lights, which I've linked the grow lights that I use down below. They're obviously not the most convenient because they are strip lights, so they do have to attach to a shelf, or if you want to hang it from your ceiling, I don't know if you want to do that, but I just attach mine to a shelf. If you have kind of like a greenhouse where it's netted, I don't know how to, there's like holes, you could attach it with like zip ties, or if you have just like a solid piece of wood for your shelf, then you just use like those command strips and like the sticky tape, and you just attach it to the bottom of the shelf, and then it'll shine onto the shelf below. You can use grow lights like that. You can use grow bulbs, so just light bulbs that you put into whatever lighting fixture. You can literally use these bulbs in anything so that you don't kind of have like an ugly setup. I don't mind kind of like an uglier setup, so that's why I use the strip lights and a shelf. But let's say if you just have like a floor plant and you want to increase the light for that plant, then for sure use kind of like a bulb or a lamp and just shine it onto the plant and just distribute it nicely so that it gives a little bit more light. It can grow bigger leaves and it will thrive in your care. But definitely get grow lights, especially when days are shorter in the winter. In the summer you might not need grow lights, but for sure in the winter I find most people do need grow lights, unless you have like a south facing window and you don't live kind of really far from the equator. Fourth on the list is yellow leaves. It's really hard to determine what the issue is really for yellow leaves. Whenever I get yellow leaves, if they aren't the most like bottom and oldest leaves, I do kind of get a little bit concerned. So sometimes it could be you overwatered and the roots are suffering and therefore they're rotting, and that's why you're having a result of yellow leaves. Or you could be underwatering, so you forgot to water and the older leaves kind of drop. Or it could be a pest issue, or it could be a low humidity issue. It can literally be a bunch of different problems, or it could just be one problem. So it's really hard to say what the reason and cause for yellow leaves is. But for me, if it is the most like bottom and oldest leaf of the plant and that's yellowing off, I usually don't really pay too much attention to it. I don't get too concerned. But for sure, whenever I get yellow leaves that are out of the ordinary and not the oldest leaves, I will check for pests, because I find if you're pretty consistent with your watering schedule and your humidity is like the same for what you were doing in the past, then you might be dealing with a pest issue. So I usually check for thrips, spider mites, and mealybugs. I do a very thorough inspection to see if there's any pests laying around, and that's what's causing the yellow leaves. Last but not least, I do want to talk about when to repot. So do you repot when a root is sticking out of the drainage hole, or do you repot when you see roots coming out of the top of the soil? When is a good time to repot, and when do you need to repot? I don't like to repot too soon, so I kind of like when there's a lot of roots and the roots are really healthy. It just means that if you have too many roots in your pot with your plant, you will have your medium dry out a little bit quicker compared to if there are less roots. It really depends on your schedule. If you don't mind watering really frequently, then I guess you can keep it in a more root-bound situation. But generally, if there's a lot of roots circling the bottom of the pot and it's kind of wrapped around and getting very, very tangled when you're taking a look at the entire soil and you like pull the plant out of its pot, I would for sure repot at that point, because you want to make sure that the soil is fresh. Usually if it's over like a year, I don't like to have my soil and my medium decompose, so I will be repotting and using fresh medium. But if it's just like within a few months, I don't mind using the same medium and just putting it into a bigger pot. I don't like to go too big in pot size. I usually just go 1 to 2 inches bigger. So if I'm going from a 3-inch, I will jump to a 4 or 5-inch. I will never go from a 3-inch pot to a 6-inch pot because that's way too big. You do end up having the risk of root rot and overwatering a plant when you go too big in size for your plant pots. Sometimes it's also a little bit tricky because if you do see a root growing out of the drainage hole, you might think it's root bound, but if you pull the plant out of its pot and you see that it's only that one single root that literally came out of the drainage hole, then you kind of just stick it back in and you place it back inside of its pot. But if it's literally like a million different roots kind of growing everywhere, then for sure you repot it to a bigger size pot. I hope I went through kind of the most common houseplant problems and solutions for you guys in today's video, and you found it helpful and enjoyed. If you did, make sure you subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any of my new videos. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. Give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys in my next one. Bye.